Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive with us. Today, we're taking a look at French.
Ooh.
And more specifically, we're going to get into regional dialects and accents.
All right.
So you're probably working on that pronunciator certificate in the library module.
Yeah.
And you're going to want to understand this stuff because it's like unlocking
Absolutely.
a whole new level of fluency when you understand the differences between Metropolitan French and Canadian French.
It really is. And it's like realizing that French isn't just one language, but it's like a whole family of languages.
With their own personalities.
Exactly.
We're not just talking about pronunciation, we're talking about grammar.
Oh, yeah.
Quirks vocabulary. That'll make a Parisian
like what?
Do a double take.
Yeah.
And even just the social perceptions tied to each dialect.
Yeah, and that's where I think the pronunciator journey gets really interesting because you're going through these lessons and you start picking up on these nuances and it makes your French
so much
way more interesting.
All right, so let's start with the basics. How did these two dialects, Metropolitan and Canadian French, end up on such different paths?
So you got to think back to the 17th century when France was colonizing parts of North America.
Okay.
And it's not just Parisians making the voyage.
Yeah.
You had Normans, Bretons, people from all over France with their own regional ways of speaking.
So a melting pot of French accents landing in Canada.
Precisely. And then you add on top of that the influence of indigenous languages already spoken there.
Right.
And you've got yourself a recipe for some serious linguistic change. And what's fascinating is that today, when you encounter a unique phrase or a grammar rule in Canadian French, it's often a direct echo from this cultural blend.
That's amazing. It's like each grammatical rule has a story to tell. But let's get to what everyone thinks about when they hear French accent pronunciation.
Okay.
What are some key differences our listeners should be attuned to between Paris and Quebec?
One of the first things you'll notice is vowels.
Oh, okay.
For example, take the word papa, meaning not in Parisian French. That A sound is more closed, nasal, but in Canadian French, it's more open, relaxed.
So a simple word like that can sound completely different depending on where you are in the French-speaking world.
Totally. And this isn't just a quirky exception. This is a pattern you'll see repeated in words like mère, tête,
Really?
all over the place. As you're going through those pronunciator lessons, really pay attention to those vowel shifts.
That's a really good tip. It's like those audio lessons are a training ground for your ear.
Yeah.
Getting you ready for real-life conversations.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about pronunciation, but what about grammar?
Ooh.
Do Metropolitan French and Canadian French always play by the same rules?
Not always.
Interesting.
Canadian French is held on to some grammatical structures that have become less common in modern Metropolitan French.
Okay.
A good example is the pronoun on.
Okay.
In Canadian French, you'll hear on as a general pronoun more frequently.
So instead of saying something like people think, you might hear on pence.
That's a great example. And this is where understanding these subtle differences becomes a real asset.
Yeah.
Because it'll not only boost your comprehension,
Right.
but it'll help you speak French in a way that's more natural.
Or more authentic, whether you're in Montreal.
Or Marseille.
Exactly.
That's what I love about this deep dive. It's not about learning dry rules.
Yeah.
It's about understanding how real people actually use the language.
Exactly.
And speaking of real people, let's get to the fun stuff.
Ooh, fun stuff.
Slang. I bet Canadian French has some real gems hidden in there.
Oh, absolutely. Canadian French is full of expressions that might leave someone from Paris scratching their head.
Oh, really? Okay. Give us a good one. What's a Canadian French phrase that would totally throw off a Parisian?
How about avoir son voyage?
Okay.
Literally, it translates to have one's trip.
Okay.
But in Canadian French, it means to be fed up
Oh,
or to have had enough.
I love it.
It's a good one. It's those kinds of expressions that make learning a language so much fun. But it also highlights why this deep dive is so important, especially as you're using pronunciator.
Absolutely.
You're not just memorizing words, you're gaining cultural insight and avoiding those embarrassing moments where you accidentally use the wrong phrase in the wrong setting.
It happens.
And as you continue working towards that pronunciator certificate,
Right.
you'll find that understanding these nuances will make a world of difference in your ability to truly connect with the language and the people who speak it.
For sure. I completely agree. And it's like you're stepping into a different world just through language.
Yeah.
And as you're navigating that landscape in pronunciator,
Right.
think of these slang quirks as hidden treasures,
Yeah.
adding a whole new dimension.
But, we've been focusing on Metropolitan and Canadian French.
Right.
But France itself
Oh, yeah.
has like a rich tapestry of accents.
Absolutely. You can't talk about French dialects without acknowledging the amazing diversity
within France.
within France.
So what are some regional accents within France that our listeners should be aware of, especially as they're exploring the different voices in pronunciator?
Well, Southern French accents are really distinct.
Okay.
They have a certain sing-song quality,
Oh.
and they tend to roll their R's even more than in Paris.
So if our listeners going through the pronunciator lessons and they hear a French speaker and they sound a bit more melodic and they're rolling their R's, they're probably from
the south of France.
That's so cool. It's like you're becoming a language detective.
Exactly.
I'm picking up on these little sonic clues.
And that's one of the skills that Pronunciator can help you develop.
Oh.
The more you listen to those diverse accents, the more attuned your ear becomes to the subtle nuances.
Speaking of nuances,
Okay.
we can't forget about the influence of English.
Right.
It's had a big impact on both Metropolitan and Canadian French, but in different ways.
That's right.
So in Canada, because of its proximity to English speakers, you see English words
all the time.
And even grammatical structures woven into Canadian French.
It's unavoidable.
So it's not just a few loan words. It's a deeper...
It's a deeper integration.
Okay.
And while Metropolitan French has certainly borrowed English words as well, especially in like technical fields or pop culture, the influence on Canadian French goes a bit further, sometimes even affecting sentence structures.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It's like seeing how two branches of the same language can evolve differently.
Exactly.
Based on their environment. For someone learning French, particularly with pronunciator, recognizing those subtle differences in the English influence can be really helpful.
It can.
It's about understanding the real-life evolution of language.
Yes.
It's about going beyond textbook French. Okay, I have to ask, we've touched on this a bit, but I'm curious. When it comes to social perceptions, do certain French accents carry any baggage in France or Canada?
That's a great question. And, you know, it's a sensitive topic.
Right.
But the reality is that accents can be linked to stereotypes.
Oh, wow.
Even prejudices.
So even within France, different accents might be perceived in different ways.
Exactly.
So
someone with a strong Southern accent in Paris might encounter some outdated stereotypes.
Wow, even though it's baseless.
Totally.
It's like how certain regional accents in English are unfairly associated with certain characteristics.
Exactly. It's unfortunate, but it's a reality.
And in Canada, I imagine there might be perceptions about French spoken with a strong English influence.
Oh, absolutely.
So even though it's natural, it's just part of the linguistic landscape.
All right.
It might be viewed as less pure.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. And this is why it's crucial to approach language learning with cultural sensitivity and awareness.
It's about recognizing the diversity as a strength.
Yes.
And language is powerful for connecting with people.
It is.
But we need to be mindful of the context.
Absolutely. So as you're going through those pronunciator lessons and encountering different voices and accents, remember that each one represents a unique cultural perspective, a piece of the larger French-speaking world.
It's about appreciating the richness and the stories behind those accents.
Absolutely.
Not just mastering the pronunciation.
Couldn't agree more. Language is a window into a culture's soul.
Ooh, I like that.
And the more we understand those diverse perspectives, the richer our experience becomes.
It's amazing how much you can learn about a culture just from their language.
Yeah.
You know, as we've been talking about these regional differences, I've been thinking about formality.
Okay.
How does Metropolitan French and Canadian French approach that?
Yeah.
Like that shift between casual conversation and a business meeting?
Right.
Is it that different?
That's a great observation, and it is something that you'll encounter as you continue your pronunciator journey.
Yeah.
Especially in those dialogue exercises. You know, French, like any language, has levels of formality.
Right.
But those levels play out differently depending on the region.
So give us an example. What might be okay in a casual setting in Quebec, but would be weird in a formal office in Paris?
One key difference is pronouns.
Okay.
In Canadian French, using tu is much more common.
Yeah.
Even in situations where Metropolitan French speakers would use vous.
Oh, interesting. So if you're in Montreal and you go to a job interview and you use tu with the interviewer, that might not be the best move.
Yeah, exactly. It's not necessarily rude, but it could come off as a little too familiar.
Especially in a professional setting.
Especially in a professional setting. It's those little cultural nuances that can really trip you up.
Yeah, and that's why I love pronunciator. It doesn't just teach you the language, it teaches you how to use it appropriately.
It's like having a cultural guide.
Okay, expert speaker.
Yes.
Before we wrap things up,
Okay.
I wanted to do a little rapid-fire quiz.
Ooh, a quiz.
I'm going to throw some words and phrases at you.
Okay.
And you tell me Metropolitan French or Canadian French.
All right. I'm right.
All right, first up, char, as in, that's a nice char you got there.
That's definitely Canadian French.
All right. Fin de semaine for weekend.
Canadian French again.
Last one, c'est pas grave, meaning it's no big deal.
Classic Metropolitan French.
Fantastic. You're good at this.
Thanks.
I think our listeners are starting to get a real feel for these differences.
Yeah, and hopefully they're also realizing how fun it is to learn about the diversity within the French language.
Absolutely. So as you continue to work towards that pronunciator certificate
Yes.
in the library module, remember Metropolitan and Canadian French each have their own unique charm,
They do.
their own stories to tell.
I agree.
Don't be afraid to dive into those differences, to explore those accents and expressions.
Have fun with it.
And who knows, maybe you'll even be inspired to check out some other dialects spoken around the world. Until next time, keep practicing.
Au revoir.